Seuraavaksi sitten Johnny Van Hove. Eli nyt meillä on tämä kansainvälinen näkemys. So now I turn into English. So the next presentation will be in English. If you don't understand something, write it down and ask later. This next presentation will be held in English, and we hope to have questions also in English. But if you have questions in Finnish or in Russian or whatever language you prefer to use, we may also, of course, try to help you and so that you can ask your questions. Like said, here in Finland we are doing a lot of good things, but sometimes we are a little bit behind. And Germany has a very huge country and long history of immigration. My mother used to be an immigrant in Germany at the 60s, and worked there with the Greeks and Turks and so on. But it was just fun for her. But for those, it was the real life. So you have a long history of this. So I'm proud to present. Johnny, please, the floor is yours.
Let me start my presentation with thanking the organization, first of all for inviting me, but also for graciously organizing this excellent event and for their hospitality, which was really impressive so far. My name is Johnny Van Hove. I'm a Belgian citizen working for the German Labor Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. More specifically, I'm a scientific consultant for one of the central labor market integration programs in Germany called the Network IQ Integration through Qualification. And I will try to present today the basic tenets of this program. And I will try to do so in a most differentiated manner, looking at the positives and the negatives also. And I will try to focus also on the Russian-speaking community within this network and what it does and what it doesn't do in terms of people with a Russian background in terms of labor market integration. But I will start my presentation by presenting you some of the basic tenets also of Germany in terms of migration and integration. If I would ask anyone in the room what you associate Germany with right now in terms of migration and integration, I guess that the topic of refugees, forced migration, Syria will come up pretty quickly, and rightly so. We know the figures and the statistics involved in this issue, and we know also the images. First of all, the statistics. The statistics are what they are, of course, and one of the famous statistics in Germany that is circulating quite often in the media is the figure of 1.5 million applications for asylum in the last 2 to 3 years. So since 2015, 1.5 million people have applied for asylum in Germany. The images involved with this topic, refugees in general, are also pretty well known, I think, also internationally. It's the image and the story that is told through these images that Germany welcomes, on the one hand, the refugees and the many refugees that have come from Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Iran and so forth in the last few years. But it's also a story that is also a very difficult one in terms of accepting so many newcomers. And this is also the story that is somehow depicted on the right side with the picture of the burned down asylum housing in the eastern part of Germany. But it's also a story, and the image of Angela Merkel tells this story, the story also of managing this kind of migration processes. And the one phrase that sticks out, of course, in this sense is the phrase of Angela Merkel 2015 at the press conference where she stated, "We can do it, wir schaffen es." Despite the fact that Germany has become, to some extent, a refugee country, this is of course just one part of the story, and the moderator already mentioned it. Germany has been, for many generations, but also particularly in the last 50 to 60 years, an immigration country. And if we look at the census statistics of 2015-16, we see that about 22% of all the people, so the overall population in Germany, that is, has a migration background. And the migration background designates all the people that have migrated to Germany since 1949 and their offspring. So it's quite broad, that kind of statistic, but still it is useful, particularly in terms of what is going on with these people in terms of labor market integration. With this kind of statistic, the OECD has called Germany the second most important immigration country, in fact, of the world after the United States. That was before the so-called refugee crisis. We know that 1/3 of the people with a migration background are from the European Union. We know that 1/3 is from Europe, but outside the European Union, and 1/3 comes from outside Europe in general. In terms of people with a Russian background or a Ukrainian background, we know that more or less 1.2 million people have a Russian background in Germany, and another 200,000 to 300,000 people have a Ukrainian background. Yes, this is a very central topic, in fact, immigration in Germany. And one of the reasons why it is such a central topic is due to the fact that Germany has a legendary low birth rate. This hasn't started in the last few years. It has started, in fact, in the early 70s, where the rate was 1.4, and below the replacement rate ever since, in fact. Germany has arguably the most unfavorable labor demographics in Europe. Without new immigration, and I'll look at my paper sheet here so that I get the numbers right. Without new immigration, the number of people of working age will shrink from 50 to 33 million by 2060. And even with a net figure of 250,000 immigrants a year, the population has been projected to be declining by as much as 14 to 18 million by 2050. So immigration is not just a matter of a humanitarian response, it's also a matter of sheer necessity for Germany. And this sheer necessity is a topic that has arrived also in the highest political echelons. A range of legislative changes have been pushed through in the last 2 decades, in fact, by a variety of political parties. One can say since the 2000s, in fact, all the political parties in power have to some extent addressed the issue of migration and integration, have passed numerous laws. And that starts from the 2000s, as I said. And what is important to know here is, I'm not going to go through this list in detail, but it's important to know 2 things. First of all, that through this legislation, there has been a structural liberalization of the labor market. It has opened up continuously. That started with the Green Card regulations, that started also with the immigration laws involved, with also, not just immigration law, but also the measures combined with that or going with that, like the integration courses. And it has, of course, also seen passing of the Recognition Act in 2012. Through these decades, a structure of instruments and language acquisition instruments and orientation courses and qualification recognition measures have been passed and have been structurally imposed also. And that makes it, in fact, a very solid structure in order to integrate people, also with a refugee background. So when 2015, 2016 came with the mass numbers that we've seen of refugees, Germany was more or less ready structurally. It was not ready, of course, in terms of the mass and the quantity. So it had to upscale, of course, all these measures like integration courses and like the opening up also of the labor market, also for people with a status that was unclarified, that was uncertain, but it did do that. This liberalization, more or less, there was an ongoing process, and as soon as 2015 came, Germany was more or less ready. A very central act, and I want to go into detail for a second into this act, was the Recognition Act of 2012. This was both, very central for Germany, but also for Network IQ. What does this act do, in fact? With this act, the German government has passed a law regulating the recognition of non-German professional qualifications. This is also an issue that the OECD has raised over and over again in the last couple of years. People with foreign qualifications, people with a migration background, struggle to get integrated in the labor market because of the fact that their qualifications, their diplomas, their skills are not recognized. They can't use them. And it's specifically for Germany a very important topic, because Germany is very strict in this sense, particularly in the vocational professions, but also in other ones. Under the provisions of this law, and this is important to know, there is a legal entitlement to a procedure of recognition. So this is not just some non-binding evaluation, this is a serious matter. I mean, if you apply for recognition, you get an answer within 3 months, that is also a law, and you get a legal entitlement to this procedure, independent from your status, whether you're an asylum seeker, whether you were just tolerated, whether you are already 20 years in Germany, you have this legal entitlement. It applies to 600 occupations under federal law, and you see that there is a Federal Recognition Act and a federal state recognition law system in place. And I will not go into detail, but it's important to know that there may be variations on the local level, but the structural level, the federal level more or less, is very decisive in these terms. So we have this law which tries to unify criteria and procedures, and which also enables people who do not have any documentation, and this is very often the case also for refugees who do not bring their documentation, who do not bring their diplomas, that there is some kind of a qualification analysis possible. This is a competence analysis, and this is a possibility that is still in a piloting phase right now, so it's not really a structural part right now. It is developing, but it's still developing in the sense that first, I think, by the end of this year, December, through the My Skills projects of the employment agency, we will have something in place that actually works on a structural level for people who do not bring their diplomas and so forth. But still, it's there, and many projects have been started, also in Network IQ, but I will come to that later. So that was the theory, the law, and this is the reality. If you want to have your qualifications recognized, what you do is you assemble all your documentation, all your diplomas, all the written documents that you got from your former employees, and you apply. You apply at a competent authority. There are 1,500 in Germany, and they decide more or less within 3 months, that is the legal entitlement, whether you get recognized or not. If there's no equivalence, you get a rejection. If there are no major differences, you can start immediately more or less in that job. You get a notification of equivalence. And if there are differences, and here the network that you becomes a major player, then you have the ability and you have the chance and the opportunity to get these gaps that you have in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge. You can bridge them through bridge training. So you have two kind of professions or occupations, in fact, under the law. You have the regulated occupations, and you have the unregulated occupations. I'm not sure to what extent you're familiar with that, but the regulated occupations are those occupations, like for instance, a doctor of medicine, nurses, teachers, and so forth. You have to have some kind of recognition to actually work in this profession in Germany. Unregulated occupations are all the other occupations, more or less, like an engineer. And through the bridge trainings and through the aptitude tests and knowledge tests, you can get your final recognition. Okay, so this is again very complex. This is difficult, and this is why the network IQ became so important also in Germany. Network IQ is not new. It was not a new player in 2012. It already existed 7 years. But it got revamped, got restructured, got re-challenged also, because it became one of the major players that actually advised the people who want to get through this process in an elegant fashion, in a successful fashion. It provides counseling, provides the bridge training necessary to get to recognition. So the central point of this process and the network IQ is that the network IQ provides the counseling, provides the bridge training, and provides the assistance necessary to get through this process successfully. Because it's complex, still German, but it's a process more or less that can be handled. So yeah, 2005. Network IQ was founded, and quite typically I would say for German migration and integration projects and programs is first of all that it was already a long-standing program as soon as the Recognition Act was passed, and as such it was a player that could be reckoned with and which was taken very seriously. A second trait, I would say, is also typically German in the sense of migration and integration, is that it's supported by a variety of labor market stakeholders. So we see, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs is the major funder of this program, for whom we also work. But it's also supported by federal ministries, such as the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, but also supported by the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees. So it's this kind of coalition of ministries, this coalition of players and central players in the labor market that make the network IQ such a relevant one. This is the structure of the network IQ. I think it's important to note that it echoes the federal structure of Germany, balancing between regional and federal approaches and stakeholders. So we have right now not just one network, the network IQ is not just one network, but a whole conglomerate of regional networks, 16 regional networks in every state there is one network. And it's important to note that despite the fact that this program is federally funded and that there's a federal coordination and that there are federal competence centers who provide input in terms of content, in terms of new developments, also in terms of migration, that the basic work is done on a local level. It is the local level that searches the target groups that require special attention. It is the local level that implements the central focus points of the program in the regional network. And it is the local network that in the end decides where the boat is heading. The local level is also a level that can push coalitions of NGOs, migration associations, public institutions, universities, charities, and so forth, who both or all of them work together in an overall number of 400 sub-projects nationwide. I forgot to mention that the annual budget is 65 million. There was an upscale of 19 million since 2016 due to the refugee influx. In total, there are more or less 1,000 people working for Network IQ on a level that includes all of the networks. Yeah. The ESF is of course also a funder of the Network IQ, but we can say that the ESF more or less provides 18 million of the overall budget. The rest of the budget is provided by the federal government and the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. So there was a structure, that is the institutional diversity, and now we go to what actually holds together all these regional networks. So we have this big network IQ, which is federally coordinated and federally also budgeted. But as we've seen, the regional networks do have a lot of room to develop their own projects, more or less, to develop projects that target certain groups. But still, certain issues have to be raised within every network. The overall goal, of course, of the network IQ has to be respected in terms of improving labor market integration of adults with foreign credentials, adults in the sense of people older than 25. And then there are 3 focus points that every network provides service to. The first focus area is what I've talked about against the background of the scheme of how the recognition law is put into practice. The first focus point, more or less, is the counseling that is going on of people with a migration background who want to get their foreign credentials recognized. It's the counseling on recognition of foreign credentials, but also on the job training. So if people get a notification and there are certain gaps in their knowledge, certain gaps in their diplomas, for instance, they can get also counseling from the network IQ in terms of what job training they actually need, where they have to go to, whether they can stay in network IQ for this bridge training, or whether they can go to an external partner. The second focus area that provides a binding factor also in all the networks is the bridge training. So we do not just counsel on job training and bridge training, we actually also provide a number of these bridge trainings. These can be a variety of training schemes. These include, for instance, bridge training for regulated professions in medicine and education to fill knowledge gaps or build the necessary language proficiency. So there are also language courses involved. On-the-job language courses most of the time. And people holding foreign university degrees are also offered special courses to enhance their professional, methodological, or language skills again as a bridge to employment. And then a final focus area in network IQ is the other coin of the integration, or the other side of the integration coin, sorry. This somehow echoes also the understanding in Germany that integration is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And this recognition leads, on the one hand, to supporting people with a migration background in focus area 1 and 2, in order for them to successfully integrate into the labor market, to provide them with the support they need to actually get into the labor market. But focus area 3 is another focus area. It's an entire focus area that tries to focus on the labor market players and how they respond to people from abroad with foreign qualifications, accents, and so forth. It includes public employment agencies, small and medium-sized businesses. So what does EQ provide there is essentially an intercultural training, in fact, of what to look at when we deal with international workers, what we consider problematic also potentially in them, but also address our stereotypes, address potentially racist tendencies. So this is the kind of intercultural training that is going on for many enterprises, and specifically also in terms of refugees. We have trained up to 20,000, I think, people from employment agencies and job centers in order for them to handle and deal with refugees in an adequate manner. So, this is all theory. I guess you want to see some numbers or statistics as well. And here are a number of them. As you can see from these statistics, counseling has grown over the last few years, explosively so. In fact, since 2016, there was almost a doubling in comparison to 2015, due also to, of course, the influx of refugees. We see in target groups that show up in our counseling services that a large number of them are EU citizens. Up to 25% in fact are from the EU. A large chunk also comes from countries like Syria, typical refugee countries. Up to 40% in fact there was in the last few years. So this is a large number. But also a large number in fact is people with a Russian-speaking background. People from Russia, people from Ukraine, up to 10,000 people in fact have been counseled in IQ, which makes them a group of 10% I think of the overall counseling that is going on. And I will talk about it in a second also what that means, potentially also vis-a-vis the large number of the 1.2 million people with Russian background who are in Germany overall. This means for IQ that only for mostly 10,000 people have been counseled. You see this tendency of rising numbers in every focus point. We see also that the statistics on Russians and Ukrainians are also very similar, particularly in terms of the percentage of the overall people that they make up. So we see, for instance, also in the job training schemes that Russians have a very similar statistic there, not in absolute numbers, but in relevant numbers. As I said also earlier on, the training courses in order to promote intercultural competence have also been a very important issue, leading to up to 20,000 individuals that were trained, particularly in job centers and employment agencies. The background of this focus on job centers and employment agencies has been that there are numerous studies, reports, research that has been done in the last few years that show that there was a real problem, a real intercultural problem in those job centers. People were not helped in the way that they should have been. There were stereotypings going on, there were discrimination cases that were revealed, and so this is a very well-known factor, in fact, discrimination and racism in job centers and in employment agencies, and thus Network IQ has done some work there, important work, in fact. That was
question related to that. So, for instance, the language. So when you have the counseling, so do you provide the counseling on the, for instance, you have 10,000 Russian-speaking persons going through the counseling. So do you give it in Russian language or do you give it in German?
The counseling is done in many languages, but it's up to the local network to decide to what extent they provide certain languages. But it's done, Russian, for instance, is one of the major languages also that is provided in this counseling. But it's again up to the local networks. The other projects, apart from the counseling, they do have a certain focus on Russian-speaking people, particularly 3 to 5 projects that I know of. But it's again up to the local network. Not the Russian communities. It's not a well-known community, in fact. And local networks that see a lot of people with a Russian background, they do tend also to provide target group projects also, like the Russians are very much, for instance, in Thailand, for instance, an issue. Yeah, but it's up to the local networks more or less. Yeah. How long is that?
15 minutes.
15,
1 minute.
So these were the statistical performances of the Network IQ. Now the question is, of course, what does this do? I mean, the Network IQ focuses on trying to get people recognized, trying to get qualified people recognized. And the question is, how do we measure the success of people who got recognized and moved on to newer jobs, potentially even better jobs or the jobs that they were trained for? What we see is, based on a survey that was done this year, that of the 800 people that actually were asked to what extent their lives or their professions or their professional careers improved, is that more people got a job. They got a job that actually fit their choice, fit their qualifications, up to 25% in fact. And the major improvement that happens, due to, of course, also the two previous aspects, is that people got paid more, increasingly more, up to a point that they got €1,000 more, in fact, a month. Given all those aspects, a qualitative improvement also has been that people with professions and jobs that are more fit to what they want to do, what they studied, is that they just got happier also. Subjectively, they got happier. So these are the qualitative aspects of the recognition law. And I think many things have been achieved in Germany and also through the network IQ, but still many critical questions remain. And the first question, and I hinted at that before already, is the question of quantity. So we know that there are 1.2 million people with a Russian background in Germany, and I would say only 10,000 of them showed up in the counseling of IQ. So how do we explain that? Can we say, people with a Russian background, they're not qualified, and thus they don't show up? That's one potential reason. I would doubt that reason, I would say. I would rather say that IQ is not targeting them enough. And that is then the question again of to what extent we need better data, more detailed data on the target groups of IQ. For instance, also the Russian-speaking community. These data are not available very often. So this is something that we have to get better in also, to really target the groups, don't leave it up to the local projects, don't leave it up to the gut feeling of the projects in the local networks, but to really go into the empirical data and have a look at who is in our counseling, why are they there, where are they going, what do they want. So this is actually something that IQ has to improve in the next few years. And another aspect, and that is the final aspect that I want to go into, is the potential limitations of a bottom-up approach, as I described it earlier. It's really the question of how do we develop, innovate, change a network that is dealing with an ever-changing migration flow in Germany. The flow, the people who come to Germany, they change, the network IQ also has to change. So that is the question, in fact, that remains for today, and I take it that we will discuss that also in the course of the Q&A after this presentation, is to what extent should IQ change, to what extent can it change, but also to what extent can it be transferred, for instance, to Finland, maybe on a smaller scale, but even so, I would love to hear your ideas, your thoughts, and your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Now, floor is open for questions. We start from here.
Hello, and thank you for the good presentation. I work in the Finnish National Agency for Education and work with the recognition of foreign qualifications. And I just would like to ask one question about this, you call this bridge training. In this case that the person applies for this decision and you see that the person needs some supplemental studies or so on, can this network influence, I will explain otherwise. We have this thing that we, for example, we make these legal binding decisions, and we might say, for example, for a teacher that they need to do supplementary studies. And then after we give the decision, it's actually up to the universities or the higher education institutions to offer those studies, but we can't influence on that. And it might be in some cases that it's not so simple to get to do these supplementing studies.
Yeah.
So does in Germany this network somehow influence on that? Do they have any kind of possibility to then support the education institutions or something that they can offer? Because here the question is always about resources and money.
Well, actually, the Network IQ, thank you for the question, by the way. The Network IQ works together with universities, also in terms of bridge training. But the bridge training is not there for people who actually need to restudy or to actually do it all anew, more or less. It's there to fill certain gaps. For instance, sorry?
Yes, but the same thing here, that we might demand, for example, 15 for ECTS studies in certain fields. So not retrain again, but just to do a small cap. But that problem is that even a small cap is sometimes difficult.
Oh, definitely, yeah. For doctors, for instance, you need a certain proficiency, right? C1 is the proficiency level on a European scale that you actually need. And this is something that can be handled pretty quickly, in fact. So this is also part of the bridge training. It's not just orientation, it's not just filling certain gaps, also in terms of what is needed in terms of skills, but also in terms of language proficiency. And this is something that can be handled pretty quickly, in fact. Yeah. But it's not. I mean, these differences in equivalence cannot be too big, right? I mean, it's not something that you can handle within a couple of months if somebody really has substantial differences. And in that case, you also have to negotiate that with the person in front of you. What is the best choice to make here? Shall we go from one qualification, one bridge training to the next? Or shall we try to figure out how to get you into university, for instance, to actually fill up the gaps with certain courses that actually make sense? Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. And very small question. So how much this diplomacy recognition costs for immigrants, or is it free? Your program?
Oh, it's free. No, it's free. Yeah, all the counseling is provided free, also the bridge training. Yeah.
And do you have also teachers and doctors in this program?
Doctors?
Medicals? Yeah. Or not?
No. I mean, I can't recall a project that actually has doctors now. No. The teachers, of course, language teachers, and people who actually have studied language science and so forth. Yes, of course. The doctors, no. Not really.
I mean
as a
like,
client.
yes, as clients, not like professionals, as clients. So migrants with a doctor or teacher diplomas. Do you have this sort of program also?
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. My question is that this began as a project to fill the gaps. So now it has been quite a long project. How do you is it going to disappear, or is it going to be a new structure? Not how can you see it for the future? And also, is there some recommendation you could give us? Is there something you would do in a different way if you think about the way you have developed IQ during these years?
Is it going to disappear? Well, it has a project format, so it's always a possibility, of course. It's been established for so long that the next period of 3 years is already planned. My guess is that this will continue, that it will change, that maybe also the budgeting will decrease at some point, particularly in terms of refugees. As I talked about the upscaling since 2016 of 19 million a year for refugees, I would say that there's a lot of money circulating right now in Germany in terms of refugees and refugee integration, so I guess that will be reduced at some point. For the rest, I would say that it will continue in the next 3 years at least. But it's true, I mean, the implicit question is also, why not try to lift it on a more structural level also, right? To get rid of the project format. I don't know why that is not done or why that is not aimed for. We know that the profession-oriented language courses that IQ started, so really the question of language proficiency on the job training, more or less, right? That is now on a structural level that is now established, more or less. So that is gone from a project format towards a really structural instrument. So we see that in certain cases, instruments are actually structurally established. But as a program as a whole, unfortunately, we don't have any information on that, how that will continue. The second question was, what will we do differently? I think we would monitor differently the numbers, the statistics what I talked about. We have general numbers, and these numbers are important for the format to legitimize also the project, but it's not a monitoring of statistics that actually help the projects, help identify the target groups that are necessary to be targeted. It doesn't help the content of the projects. I think that we would do differently as the monitoring involved. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for a wonderful presentation, and I will present Helsinki Adult Vocational Institute. So the question of qualification recognition is extremely topical for us. Currently, I guess each institution or organization does their own counseling, career counseling, or of how to go about the process of recognition. Of course, we have the official authority to do the recognition process. But my question actually concerns, because your IQ network provides career counseling in a way, and then there is another institutions, the job centers and unemployment offices who have the official relation in order to get the social benefits for the person while they are unemployed. So are there any situations where your advice is in some way contradictory or interpreted differently by the job center? Say you say that this bridging would be necessary, and they say no. Like how do you deal with this agency cooperation? And then I'd like to hear more about this My Skills project. That sounds very fascinating.
Yeah. The job partners, the job centers and the employment agencies are partners also of the network IQ. A large number of the people who come to IQ, to the IQ counseling, come through the job centers, in fact. There's hardly a case that I can remember of where there was a clear discrepancy between what the job center said and what IQ said, because we work together, in fact. I mean, that is the theory. In practice, I would take it that there are discrepancies or that there are problems. But in the end, job centers are not there to counsel people in terms of orientation, for instance, right? So they come to us. I think that is very clear, and the roles also involved are very clear there. I think I don't think that the job centers are willing to take up that kind of orientation or advice or counseling service. Yeah. What was your second question again? My skills. Yeah, it is again a partnership of various institutions that's going on there. So the major strategic partner here is again the Slovak agency in Germany, together with the foundation, the Bertelsmann Foundation, in fact, and together with our organization, in fact, we developed these My Skills competence processes. So it's still in the piloting phase, right? So there are, I think, 30 or 35 jobs, clear jobs, like engineer, for instance, or electronic engineer, or a cook, particularly in the vocational field that it's done. And what is done is that it's a kind of a test, in fact, to what extent a person, through questions, right? It's kind of a test, through questions, but also strongly, with a strong visual component also, because language, German language in particular, it's not the strength of many refugees, and it's a refugee project. So we have questions and visuals, and it's an attempt, in fact, to have a look at what people can do in a certain field. To what extent do they know the vocabulary? Do they know the process involved? So it's really a kind of a first instrument, in fact, to validate the competences of people who do not bring their documents. But this is just the first step, right? Then there are other projects like Qualification, for instance, who go a step further and you try to not just test, but also really validate. It's still non-binding, not legally binding in that case. But still it's the first step, more or less, to figure out to what extent a person has a certain skill. We can talk about some more if you like.
I actually had my own question a little bit related to this. So like it was already 15 years ago, so I was in Canada getting to some inside information how their immigration system works, and there was this IQ was there also, but it was the IQ of the people they were like counting on, so they give grades to different kind of people, so that was before they were entering. So there was this, let's say, not reconciliation, but more like evaluating the potential. So my question to you is that do you evaluate the people during this process? I mean, that okay, how good immigrants or how good, let's say, workforce or experts or that we have. And then the other thing is that can you apply to your system before you enter Germany, or is it just for those who are in Germany already?
No, the second question I can answer by saying that you can actually start the process already from abroad. You can also have a look at the reference profession that you aim for in Germany through the website, and you actually can start the process already. And that is done to some extent, but it's not the bulk of all the applications that are processed through IQ, I would say. First question was?
It was just this more not like helping but evaluating. So do you have this evaluation? Because it was a little bit this
in IQ
related to this.
In IQ itself?
In IQ.
Yeah, it is then also, yes, competences are also evaluated and analyzed through various instruments, but again, it's a local issue in that sense. It's done, but the question is, there's not a lack of competence evaluations in Germany, but it's still in a piloting phase most of the time, so there's no standard at this point, and we don't really know what actually does. There's a problem. What do you do with an evaluation that says, this person can do this and that, and then you go to an employer, and this person in front of you actually accepts this kind of evaluation, or would they say this is no standard for us? We don't know what it means. So this is actually the major problem. Right? There's no standard. So my skills is more or less the attempt to get a first standard, to get a first step into the door, more or less. But more will have to follow, and all these processes and all these evaluations will have to get some kind of a standard. Yeah.
You like standards, we like standards. We have German schooling system in Finland, so we are as structural as you are. So any other questions? One, two questions we can have before we go to have lunch. Now is your turn, now is your chance, because Johnny unfortunately must leave back home very soon. So.
Thank you. I'm going to take the chance. My name is Lisa Lari. I'm from the National Statistical Agency. I was wondering the coverage of your program. I was trying to calculate, I don't know if I got it right, but around maybe 1% of all immigrant population go through your system. 1%. Is it correct?
It depends on the service that you ask for now.
Yeah.
You mean in general?
I was like in general, what is the coverage like? What is the share of people that you target that you reach from the total immigrant population?
Yeah, 22. So we have in total, was it again 18.5 million people with migration background in Germany, and 100,000 people were counseled over the last 2 years. So you do the math. No, it's of course it's a program that targets a certain group, right? People with a qualification, people with foreign qualifications. Very often these are people, you know, with a medical background, doctors, nurses, engineers, teachers. These are the major groups in IQ, more or less.
Yeah, that was actually what I wanted to ask. Like, how do you feel about reaching these people? Is there a difference between people who work in regulated professions? I think that is the case for us as well. That those who work as doctors, they go to the process, and those who work in non-regulated professions, they don't. And what I see from my data is that those who work in non-regulated professions, they are very often overqualified, so they should go to these programs, but they don't, because they are not obliged to do that. So, how do you feel about reaching those people?
Oh, it's unsatisfactory, definitely. I mean, that's what I talked about also, the number, the quantity issue, right? I mean, there are so many people with a migration background in Germany, and so little people that end up in IQ, more or less. You know, so little in terms of, 100,000 is still a considerable number. Yeah, I mean, it's a real question. It's a real question also of how we deal with the data that we have and how we will use that in the future also. And this issue will get more important also in the next few years because of the Syrians and all the other with the refugee status. Because we see, for instance, that Syrians are very well qualified. In fact, they're not the group that concerns us, but people from Afghanistan, for instance, or from Iraq, people from a war-torn region where there was a war going on for the last 5 to 10 years. And these are the people that actually worry us, but we don't really can pinpoint that in terms of the factual numbers involved. So, if you want to reach these people, and that's also the question, I think, how to reach people better and more efficiently, I think we should, consider that now in the next few years, how to figure that out. Yeah.
Thanks for the representation.
Yeah.
Last question. Who is the pro? Okay, there is one. Final, then we're gonna have a lunch.
Yes, Hove from Hove International Organization. In Finland, I mean, I work with immigrants, and we are facing daily problems like how recognition of qualification is really challenging here in Finland, because first of all, people they don't have their papers with them. It takes so long time to get the certificates, and then especially when the certificates are completely gone. So I mean, like in this kind of cases, like really what you would advise us to do? I mean, engineer, he has an engineering, he has a university degree, he has worked as an engineer, but he doesn't have anything to prove that. So is there any way that these people can really get support so their certificates can be testified or qualified in this kind of situation?
So the recognition law, thank you very much for the question. The recognition law provides an opportunity for them, right? So they can have their competences and their qualifications recognized through tests, through bridge training and so forth. And this is what we're talking about today also, in many cases, in many questions, is how to provide that kind of a service. So there are knowledge tests for doctors, for instance, or attitude tests that can actually provide a substitution more or less for their documents. So these are tests that are time consuming, that are really costly also for the German state, but they are done, particularly for people with a medical background. It's not done very frequently. It's not something that happens on a scale of 100,000 people who can do that, right? It's just a couple of them, more or less a couple of hundreds, I would say, over the last few years. But that's why these My Skills, for instance, but also other tests become so important, particularly not just for regulated professions, but also the non-regulated professions, or for the vocational professions, for instance. So that is the big question that we have in Germany as well. What to do with people who come to Germany without documents, without throwing away their talents, accepting them as they are, and still somehow, trying to make them into productive talents also in the workforce. It's a big question. There's no clear answer from Germany either. There are, as I said, it's all very early still. I mean, although people with a refugee status, and these are the people that we're talking about in terms of the documents, right? As they're in the system, they're in the integration course system, they are doing language courses right now, but they're not really in the labor market at this point. Only, I think, 10 to 15% of those people that came since 2015 actually work. And they don't work as skilled workers most of the time, they work in very low skilled jobs at this point, because they need money, they have debt, they want to provide an income for their families in Syria, for instance. So the issue of competence, it sounds horrible, but it can wait another couple of months. But then we would really have to, establish some kind of a standard. I mean, the time for the German government in this sense is up, more or less. It's over. Yeah, but it's coming.
And of course, there's always room for new innovations in this, because I was last week or so, there was Sitra, the Finnish National Fund for Research and Development. They had their 50th birthday, and they had this competition. It was Ratkaisu 100, so it's like, how do you translate it into? It's like Solution 100. It's for the 100th anniversary of Finland, and they rewarded 2 projects there. And the main prize was like 1 million euros for this project. So now they divided into 2. And the other one was this positive CV. So it's like for those people, it's actually for the youngsters in a way. So that you maybe dropped out of the school, but you are doing a lot of hobbies and you're doing this and this and this. So they make a CV for you, or you can upload your CV. But I think here it could be also something, because people are, like we have a lot of these Russian-speaking organizations here in Finland, people are involved there, they do a lot of things, and they like rotate like their skills and the networks and everything. So maybe that project could be linked not only for the youngsters, but maybe for the immigrants as well. So just innovations. But okay, thank you very much, Johnny, and please. But there's a lot of things to do, and after the lunch break we go in action. So what we really are doing in Vantaan, and let's go operational from these let's say higher level international discussions. Have a nice lunch.